Entertainment journalism is always a difficult concept to analyse because its very existence derives from our collective thirst for pop culture. How important has entertainment journalism been to charting the fads and fashions in our society?
That's your opening question. Like
Yeah.
that's an astounding question. Um, I think it's vitally important. I think like a lot of people, I grew up loving entertainment and popular culture. That's what I spent a lot of my time doing, watching TV shows, listening to music, going to the cinema. And then, this is going way back, just trying to find out as much as I could about all those things that I was listening to, watching, and just sort of trying to find out that information. There wasn't as much around, going back a long time now, decades. And I think it has been really important because I think that sort of entertainment has such a vital role in society because it reflects things that are happening at the time, but it also serves as a distraction and an escapism that's also much needed from really difficult times for people. So I would genuinely be lost without entertainment. That's absolutely my happy place. And I share it with my kids now and, my husband, he has exactly the same passion as I do for music and film and TV and things. And he doesn't work in this area of culture, but he's still as invested in it as I am. And I think lots of people are.
Hmm. Researching your early career, was interested to learn that you worked for a commercial company called Unique, which provided commercial radio stations with entertainment news. We've become accustomed to big conglomerates like the BBC having the ability to fulfill almost every aspect of pop culture, but with limited budgets and adherence to the commercial break format. How do commercial broadcasters manage to devote enough airtime to entertainment news?
Well, I think it's an ever evolving part of commercial radio. So I started when I was sort of in my late teens. I did work experience at my local commercial radio station. So commercial radio, even though I kind of grew up listening to genuinely Radio 1, BBC Radio 1 was my dream station that I listened to all the time. And that's where I got my news from as well, with their programming. And radio was sort of such a passion and a love for me. I felt that it spoke to me in a way that other forms of entertainment and journalism didn't. And so I went and did work experience at Fox FM, which was my local Oxford radio station, which I adored. And I then ended up working there for a while. And at the time, they had, I think it was a half hour daily news program called the Fox Report. So 30 minutes on a commercial radio station. And I was the one who was always pushing for, I think that there are so many great bands, certainly in Oxfordshire. So I was like, we need to try and get an interview with Radiohead. We need to be covering this kind of pop culture thing. And I was always trying to sort of push that news boundary of validating entertainment news as genuine interest to an audience and also showing that, as I was just sort of saying in that first answer, how much it actually reflects and informs an audience as well. I mean, I think you only have to kind of look at so we're recording this in 2024, and if you think about undoubtedly like the TV show that's had the most impact this year with Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, and then like the impact that that's had on society and making real change. I think entertainment, when it's done well, can absolutely do that. And it's a really useful device for changing culture and just informing people in a much kinder and easier to digest way, I think. So, sort of going back to your question, I think on commercial radio, it's really difficult because often those entertainment things can get squeezed, or people just think that it's fluff and that it doesn't serve a purpose. But I disagree with that. I think that it always has done, and I will always fight to give it a place.
Yeah. Josh said, what a mental thing that on a local radio station you might be chatting with Radiohead.
Yeah, I know. But also like just bizarre that there was this half-hour news program that doesn't really exist on commercial formats anymore. And, I think increasingly the importance of really local news. And, that's why sort of BBC local radio does such a vital service now, especially when there's, issues with flooding and just sort of difficulties in the community. It's the people who actually live there and broadcast and know the intricacies of how that community operates that is really important. So yeah, I mean, Oxfordshire was a great patch, if you like, to have for commercial radio because there were so many good things going on there.
Yeah. When I was growing up, Radio 1 Newsbeat was different from any other news outlet. In your opinion, how significant were figures like yourself, Dominic Byrne, and Caroline Atkinson in establishing the modern tone for Radio 1 News?
Well, that's ridiculously flattering that you think that I'm like my own worst enemy. I never particularly think that I've had an impact on what I do because I genuinely love it. And it kind of almost seemed like the only, well, not necessarily the only option for me, but yeah, so I was saying like I grew up listening to Radio 1. I loved listening to Radio 1. It's where I got my news. It was the way that I found news the most digestible and absolutely essential to my understanding of the world. And it was way easier than trying to read a newspaper or trying to listen to other long form news content. And so to be able to have even contributed a little bit to that, I would say that it's still, I was always kind of trying to push for more entertainment news when I was at Newsbeat and to show that it had a real service and it could do some really interesting things. And that's always kind of a bit of a fight that you have to have, I think, because, obviously there's so much challenging news in the world as well. And, you don't want to kind of be doing anybody else a disservice. But I mean, it's great if you think there was any impact. I hope that there was. And yeah, I just hope that I've been part of that tradition to carry on sort of informing people in an entertaining way as much as possible.
In your opinion, how influential was Matthew Bannister in establishing that new sound to Radio 1?
I didn't know him at all. I think anybody who kind of takes a station and sort of shape shifts a change in the way that it's broadcast and what it does. Yeah, I think it's also, whenever anybody takes over, they always want to kind of do stuff in their own way. So I can only kind of talk about what it was like when I joined at Radio 1 and, I really loved it. It was very difficult. The hours were incredibly long. I think it's one of those things where that it's a real privilege to be able to work for a place like that. And sometimes that means that you kind of do things that you maybe wouldn't do in other workplaces, like work ridiculously long shifts because you want to and because you want to finish that interview or finish that story or, turn around that edit. I think like radio and Radio 1 especially has always been particularly agile and flexible in trying new things and very quick in how it does that. And yeah, I think that's probably just part of that tradition of change and seeing how things sound and develop.
Of course, while at Radio 1, you became the entertainment reporter on Jo Wiley's Lunchtime Social. What were your first impressions of her?
I love Jo Wiley. I am so fortunate that I still get to work with her now on Radio 2, which is incredible. I I mean, I should probably hate me saying this, but like lots of people, like I listened to her before I got to work with her. She's not that much older than me at all. She was just way ahead of the curve in terms of jump starting her radio career, I think. But yeah, like the evening session was something that I would listen to when I was like studying, and just the music that her and Steve Lamacq would play absolutely informed my musical education, in a time way before Spotify or Apple Music or any of the other streaming platforms. It was all about kind of trusting your friends to share music with you. And I had a lot of that from I've got a big sister, so I listened to a lot of her music through the bedroom walls for sure. But yeah, I absolutely think of somebody like Jo Wiley as like a radio friend before she was an actual friend, because I trusted her choices. So if she'd say, I've just got this new band, like you won't have heard of them now, but trust me, you're going to, I would trust that they were going to be huge. And, I really admire her sort of ability to curate a show still. She cares so passionately about the music that's played on her radio shows. And yeah, it's a joy to be even a teeny tiny part of that.
Yeah. Entertainment news on a youth orientated station may be different from the entertainment news you might expect from Radio 2. How do you go about finding those stories which will appeal to the right demographic?
Yeah, so I think it's part of it has to come from you want to be a part of the culture that you're representing. So I think that's why it's really important that there's a diverse makeup of a workforce at a station like Radio One, which there absolutely is and was, to reflect as many people as you can, different cultures and different music and stories that they might want to listen to. I also think sort of transitioning to Radio 2, it's what I always try to do in the stories that I'll try and chase up or follow is make sure that I'm trying to like push those boundaries a little bit as much as I can. So not to scare away any listeners, but just to hopefully seek out some of those culture points that they might not have had access to, that I am in a privileged position to be able to go and see things for free if I get press tickets, or but I take it quite seriously. I sort of do make sure that I look around and I'm not just kind of going for the obvious thing or, just like the white middle class thing. I'm really trying to make sure that I've kind of got my ears and eyes open to see what else is out there and see what else I can shine a light on. That, I'm very well aware that there aren't sometimes that many places on mainstream stations where you can get a chance to do that. So that's what I want to try and do is try and draw a bit of attention or just suggest something else culturally that maybe people haven't heard of or wouldn't have expected that they might like. So I'll always try and kind of, if it is something a bit new, that you talk about it in a way that if you like this, then have a look about this, or this is actually the context around how this thing came to be, which may be more familiar than you think it might be. So yeah, I think that's one of the most fun bits I think about the work that I do at the moment, is just trying to sort of expand your cultural horizons.
Yeah. Being an entertainment journalist in the 90s must have been a rewarding experience. How important were areas like Camden in offering journalism raw access to the protagonists of Britpop?
Oof, yeah. Yeah, great, but also a strange time. So I kind of got into journalism and entertainment journalism first and foremost because I was a fan and still am a fan of, as I was saying, music, film, TV, culture. And there's kind of a bit of a weird thing when you start working in it, that some people that you're trying to interview understand that, and other people are automatically wary because they think you're trying to be, I know, demean them, or trying to, that kind of classic journalist trying to tear down somebody. And I never wanted to do that at all. I have had editors and things that I've worked with previously who were like, you've got to like go for like that tough story. And sometimes you'd be like, but I just don't want to. I don't want to do that. Either that the person's actually not going to tell you that story, or it just seems like a bit of a setup that I didn't particularly want to be a part of. And I think some of those things, like, Amy Winehouse, especially in the early 2000s, had a really difficult time. And I got to interview her quite a few times, but there was definitely a shift then. And I think in the 90s and the early 2000s, tabloid and a lot of showbiz entertainment journalism was really mean, and it was very difficult to try and stay, I hope, on the kind of right side of being a good person and still doing decent journalism, but not exploiting people who are clearly having a really difficult time as well.
Mm.
Yeah. Uh, look, no, birthday. What? Me, how is oh, you be able say that anymore.
Josh said, I suppose nowadays with mental health being a bit more of a hot topic, that you wouldn't be able or expected to take that line anymore.
No, I think it happily has shifted. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting, even just thanks to your great questions, Josh, sort of thinking about that time, because so from my perspective as a younger journalist then, it's really difficult because I would also be scared of, you'd be considered weak if you hadn't got the story or not very good at your job. Whereas actually you kind of know, like, if something doesn't feel right, if you don't want to ask those questions or if you don't want to do that thing. So I probably shouldn't be admitting this out loud, but I definitely had quite a few situations where I'd planned an interview and I'd been organize an interview and I'd have some people saying, okay, this is like the line of questioning you need to go down. And I'd know that I wasn't going to do that. So you'd have to lie to people and say, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Yeah, no problem. And then you kind of just have to use your skills as an interviewer, which is something that I love doing. And you have to read the room and you have to just, I think, kind of understand how you can navigate those situations and still come out with something interesting that you want to share with people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be there. There's always so many different sides to a story, right? And sometimes those really kind of cut and dried ways of questioning that are never going to work and that are actually really cruel, you just had to sort of try and shy away from. But it was, thinking about it now, super stressful. And you then question yourself about whether you're really bad at your job, but maybe in hindsight would think, well, actually, maybe more people, I'm not saying that I got it right all the time as well, but maybe more of us should have questioned that. But it's really hard when you've got people more experienced and older and with more power and authority than you telling you should do something one way when you kind of know that's actually not what you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen, what are you? Oh, I,
Justin, even in the interviews that he writes and the people that we interview, it sometimes is one of those situations where Josh has written the questions, but when you get into the interview, you can kind of tell that that person doesn't want to talk about that period of their life or the company they were working for, and you have to sort of quickly switch to something else. It's a bit of a moving thing, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I think that's kind of one of the things that often doesn't get talked about as much in interviewing is that, yeah, of course, you have to do your research and you have to have your list of questions, but you then vitally have to listen to what people say and also, in as empathetic a way as possible, read the room. So, I'm sure you've had the same thing, Josh, where you've set it up and you think somebody, or they always seem really outgoing in interviews, and then actually your interview starts and they're somehow, you can just tell they're really quiet, or that they're given quite short answers that they don't usually give. And then you sort of have to pivot because you realize maybe something's happened to them in their personal life today and they're not going to give what you think you were going to get. So you have to change your direction as an interviewer. And that's part of the fun of it as well. But yeah, I think it's a really important skill to try and hone, to just pick up on that. And lots of people don't, but you always get the best interviews, I think, if you do pick up on those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned interviewing there. You're no stranger to an interview. You interviewed everyone from Meryl Streep to Dolly Parton to Jay-Z. Looking at those interviews as a whole, what do you think they say about our evolving attitudes towards popular culture?
Ooh, I think I was quite lucky in sort of the cool time when I was doing a lot of those interviews day in, day out. Sometimes I would have ridiculous days at Radio 1, which I really should have kept a journal for, and I didn't. Because I was genuinely too busy, which is no excuse. But, you might have sometimes those three things on the same day. So you might have, like a junket interview with Meryl Streep and then, dashing across London to go to a gig and interview Jay-Z. And it's sort of like, it does mess with your head quite a lot because it's sort of like insanely it's just like it's an insane situation to be in, that there are all these people that you get to sort of spend time with. And I think sometimes, a lot of the time, I would get quite nervous, but I'd mainly get nervous if I hadn't had enough time to do my research. And by that, I mean, you just kind of want to be respectful so that if you're in an interview with somebody, that you do kind of pick up on any of the references that they make, and you're sort of aware of other things that are going on in their life. But obviously, such a joy to be able to spend time with these people, and yeah, just kind of again, sort of what we were talking about before. There was always that frustration where it's a very different thing sometimes about being able to ask genuinely the things that you as a fan might want to ask, versus the reason why the interview might have been set up, or the kind of ulterior motive that somebody might want you to ask a certain question. So that was always quite pain inducing, I think, when you're setting up to do those interviews. But on the whole, like, always like a fascinating experience. But I have never, I don't think, come out of an interview where I haven't felt like I could have asked something a bit better, or I should have maybe picked up on something. I'm always kind of questioning whether I did enough in that interview, which used to kind of really annoy me. But now I think it probably just shows that I genuinely care, and I'm always curious and trying to do better. So I think that's probably a good thing to hold on to.
Definitely. Um, so as mentioned earlier, a move to Radio 2 has resulted in a reunion with radio icon and friend of Beyond the Title, the lovely Jo Whiley. How has your on-air chemistry matured over time?
I don't know. Like, I think it's one of those funny things where I'm so Jo's so great, and she's so lovely to chat to. You were asking about what it was like when I kind of first got to work with her, and I didn't say that I was pretty intimidated as well, just because, I think she's so smart and she's so cool, and I am definitely not cool. And she kind of knows so much about music, and has such a sort of ease of broadcasting that I've always admired. So in terms of like our chemistry, I think it does really help if you like somebody genuinely. I think you can tell that on the radio, because that's so much what radio is, right? Often radio is, I suppose it's either two things. It's either something that's on in the background in like a sort of big work environment, or if there are lots of people around where you're sort of tuning in and out, or it's quite an intimate experience where you're listening just yourself, either if you're, on a commute or in the car or whatever it is. So you have to have that kind of warm connection and relatability, I think, with an audience listening. But having said that, I think part of it comes from, whilst I'm aware that the audience is there, I think it would really freak me out if I stopped to think about how many people were listening at any one time. So I generally just think about it as having a conversation with Jo when I'm on the radio with her. And maybe that's the kind of secret to how we get on. I think I don't really, if I thought about other people listening, I would get incredibly shy. But when you're doing it, it's just the pair of you in a studio with a producer or two who are always lovely on Jo's team as well. So yeah, I think I just think of it as a lovely chat.
Yeah. You're also a driving force behind many podcasts and work with another friend of the podcast, Sean Keaveney, on the lineup. Why do you think podcasts are so important to contemporary culture?
I think, podcasts have been around for a really long time now, and I think that they are just an extension of radio in many ways. But they, before a lot of the radio platforms evolved on how you could listen and how you could then sort of take away chunks of radio to listen to at your own leisure, podcasts were the first to sort of capture some of those moments and make you be able to find out who are your kind of like podcast friends, if you want to, that you wanted to have in your life. And I think that's what the best podcasts do, are ones where you feel you're part of that conversation, and you look forward to listening to something every week. Working on the lineup with Sean Keaveney, which we haven't done for a while, but it was great. Like, it was so lovely. He was fantastic to work with, and we got to speak to some brilliant people about music and curating their dream festival lineup. And yeah, I think it's just if you can kind of find the podcasts that really connect with you as a listener, yeah, it's sort of the same as radio. You sort of tend to think that you are part of that world in the best way, and you kind of want to just keep listening.
Okay. And if I do, and he kids, he will, uh, oh, yeah.
Just he interviewed Sean Keaveney at the Isle of Wight Festival about 30 seconds after he'd woken up from a nap.
That does not surprise me.
Um, as we know, mental health remains a hot topic on political agenda, and since the pandemic, there seems to be a universal understanding about our emotions in a way that wasn't there before. With this in mind, how important are podcasts like Killing It to ensuring that this dialogue can be continued?
Killing It was an incredible podcast to work on. So for people that don't know, it was a Spotify original, so you can only get it on Spotify. And they'd had a business series before I got involved, and then we got to do a couple of music-based series, and it was about mental health in the music industry. And it was hosted by Jordan Stevens and Petra Velzeboer, who's a psychotherapist, and the format of the podcast was that so you'd have a chat between Jordan and Petra and then whoever the guest was to start with for about 10 minutes or so, and then Jordan would leave the recording booth and come and sit out with us listening, and then you'd basically have this on-air podcast recorded therapy session between Petra and that week's guest. And then at the end, Jordan would come back into the room, into the recording booth, and they would do a sort of sum up, a conclusion about what that was and what that had listened to. I should say as well that part of that format was that we were trying to be as responsible and kind as we could. So we'd obviously lay all this out when I was booking the guests for that show and trying to work out who would be willing to open themselves up in quite a deep way about some really challenging subjects a lot of the time. And then even when they arrived on the day for the recording, Petra would take them away from anybody else who was there for the day, and they'd just have a 5-minute private conversation, sort of between client and therapist, if you like, about how they were that day, if there was anything that they didn't want to talk about, if there are any particular boundaries that she would know as the professional in the room to not probe them on. And then the recording would begin. But I hope that, I think at the time I think it did okay, that series, but I hope that people might rediscover it, because I feel like it was quite ahead of its time, because I think we were recording those in like 2019, 2020, and they were really involving discussions. You know, we had Liam Payne on there, for example, really opening up about his mental health struggles, sort of a long time before actually he did like the Stephen Bartlett conversation that I think most people might know. But yeah, we had Brett Anderson was on there, Big Pig was on there. It was really fascinating, and I'm really grateful for all the musicians who allowed themselves to be vulnerable in that way, because I think it is really important for people to listen to those conversations and to hear how other people have coped with them, or even to just feel that other people are going through similar things that they might have been going through, and to have Petra as the psychotherapist in the room as well to, you know, offer some practical and useful and kind ways through as well, was just brilliant. I love that series.
Yeah.
You remember that no who say swing that was
Josh said, do you remember the Channel 4 show Shrink Wrapped with Pamela Stevenson?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I think it's hard because to have those, there's kind of like an artifice, right, in most interviews whereby certainly people in the public eye, and even more so now. Like I feel like I was quite lucky to navigate a time when people were more open, maybe in interviews. Whereas now I think people are, for good reason, quite a lot more guarded, or have had more media training to sort of only say the kind of safe things or things that their team want to put out in the world, because there are still, so many people, and so there's so much a larger landscape of social media now where things can be taken out of context and twisted, or not sort of put in the way that they were intended. But yeah, I think the best conversations are the ones where people are genuinely sort of speaking from the heart and being truthful, but that can often come with more consequences. So I'm grateful for people who do that, but I know that it's not an easy thing to do at all.
Mm. Looking back at your career, what's your proudest achievement?
What is my proudest achievement? Hopefully it's still to come, would probably be my answer, in that always like evolving and trying to do different things. I still had to pinch myself that I got to work on Radio 1 for such a long time, because it was my dream job. And I never thought that I'd be able to do that. So I can't believe that I kind of got to be in that building sort of with so many creative, like-minded people who worked so hard, but also had so much fun as well. There were some really difficult times at Radio 1, don't get me wrong, but as there are with any job. But sort of proudest moments. Interviewing Dolly Parton was like a dream. I think things like again, this wasn't just me, but I worked with some great people. Like I've got a friend still, Jacqueline Springer, who now she's a curator at the V&A Museum, and she works on One Extra as well as Newsbeat on Radio 1. And we would often have quite a lot of culture chats, which I really enjoyed. But we would often do things like try and, God, I can't remember what the year was, but I managed to do a really long interview with Demi Lovato, where she opened up about her intense struggles with mental health, again at a time before people were really talking about that. I had actually I listened to there was an interview, I can't remember when this was, but Ollie Alexander was talking about how he had started sort of talking a bit more about his mental health, but he took it back to a time when he was asked, doing an interview at the Reading Festival. He was asked about his mental health, and he was like, "That's the first time I'd been asked about that," and it was really refreshing and just sort of surprising that those things were happening. And that was me. I was the one that asked him about mental health at the Reading Festival, and yeah, I think those kind of things are great, where you're maybe not that conscious that you're doing something particularly different at the time in that moment, but yeah, you're just sort of always hopefully trying to push those boundaries and move the conversation on a little bit. And yeah, so I think there are so many, but all those kind of little things I think are really great and satisfying now when you look back on them.
Yeah.
So, looking to outcome. Well, the subject. How to you get a feeling that you never say.
Josh said, as an interviewer, when you make those sort of bookings, how do you get a feeling that it's safe to go into those sorts of things?
I think some of it is relationship building. So some of it would be if you hopefully have been able to interview these people before. Doesn't even have to be a huge number of times, but you sort of become a bit of a recognized and hopefully trusted face, so that they know that if you're going to ask those questions, you're not going to be the outlet that sort of takes it out of context or turns it into something that wasn't intended. But also I think there's my friend Frances Cronin, who also works at Newsbeat. She used to say, I can't remember the phrase that she said, but she always used to be amused by how I could ask the most sort of direct, personal, difficult question, but in the kindest phrasing. She'd be like, you sort of have the, well, she said kindly about me that I had this ability to ask some of those really difficult things, but I don't know whether it was the tone I used or the choice of words that I managed to construct a phrase where it kind of is delivered hopefully in the way that it's intended. So not hugely blunt, but just kind of getting to the point. But yeah, I think it's a skill, hopefully.
Yeah.
One, three, family, he said, gave me for
Josh said when we interviewed Barry Cryer, he always said that when you were interviewed by David Frost, it was like having a warm bath and a cold shower both at the same time.
Yeah, I think maybe that's yeah, I mean, who doesn't like that, right? I think that's a good way to put it. And that's, if I can come anywhere near that sort of level of interviewing, that's genuinely what I love to do. But I think it's also really bearing in mind that it's never lost on me. And I'm not saying this to kind of be overly humble or anything, but I know that it's a privilege that I get to be in the room with some of these people. So I'm always conscious of wanting to kind of honor what I think people might be interested in hearing. And that's always like cushioned with, as I said, kind of various times, like I love pop culture. I love like being in this world and getting to hear creative people talking about these incredible things that they've done. And I just want to share as much of that as possible. So I think it's sort of got that at its base, if you know what I mean. So there's a genuine kind of, you're trying to hold people up and lift them up and share that with the world. But yeah, still asking some of those difficult questions, the cold showers in the hot bath.
Lastly, what's next for Natalie Jamieson?
Good question. I love radio. I would absolutely love to do more radio. Um, it's just it's still a challenge to find places where they are happy to give up some airtime to talk about culture. And I think probably as I get a bit older as well, like it's harder sometimes to do those in really short sound bites because you don't want to shortchange the projects that people have worked on so hard. And I think that radio's evolved a lot more. And, I appreciate as well. Sometimes I'll listen to the radio and you're like, oh, just shut up, like play another track. But even so, I think sometimes those really short sound bites that used to be the kind of bread and butter of a lot of stuff that I would do and other journalists would do on the radio feel quite unsatisfying sometimes because you can't really kind of dig deep and find out about what's really going on with the creative thing that they produced. I do a books podcast called Bestsellers with a friend of mine, Phil Williams. And I love that we get to talk to authors for an hour each time. And that's also part of my kind of hopefully next phase of my career is writing. So I'm writing a book at the moment. I've written one fiction book, and I'm writing my second fiction book at the moment. And the first one sadly didn't get acquired by publishers. Not an unusual story, and it won't have been wasted. I'm still incredibly proud that I got to finish a fiction book, and I've got a really great literary agent. So I'm working with her on my next book, and I'd love to be able to write and create something myself. I think having spent a career where I nosily and using my curiosity get to have been able to speak to so many people within the creative industries. I think I'd like to kind of dive a bit more further into that myself and create more of my own work if I can. But it'd be great to get paid for some of that at some point too.
Yeah.
Richard. You might be but
Just say if we do another podcast, it might be you coming back as a bestseller.
I would love that, and I would happily come back as a bestseller. But yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of what next for me, I think I just love it. I there's so much great stuff out there in the world and so much to learn, and I never want to lose that curiosity I have to educate myself as well and just learn more about the incredible things that people have created. And if I can still get to work somehow within that arena whilst creating something myself and coming back on here to chat about my own bestseller, then great. That's what I'd love to do.
Fantastic.
hey, one, yeah, with
Josh said one last question.
you, have you
Josh said, as an expert in the podcast field, we'll push you for a rating on it. How would you rate your Beyond the Time experience?
I think on genuinely, like from that first question, I was like, wow, Josh, you were like coming out of the gate with a really well constructed question. I think oftentimes when I'm starting an interview, I need to engage my brain, and it's a much slower process for me to get there sometimes. So I think you're outstanding, like obviously 10 out of 10. And the production values and just the range of guests that you get.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Honestly, total pleasure. And genuinely great questions. Yeah, I still find it really weird being the person answering something rather than asking the question. But thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's been a joy.
No problem. Josh said he loves interviewing people like you because you know exactly what we want. So.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. And I'm glad that you're feeling better as well. And
yeah. No, thank you very much. We will let you know, obviously, when it's going out and all the other stuff. And we'll be in touch. We'll speak to you soon.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And lovely to see you on here. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, James.
No problem. Take care. Have a nice day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Bye.